Hello friends, welcome back to another video of Ubuntu series. So in this video we are going to see user access management and its configurations on Ubuntu server. So in Unix for user access management there are multiple methods and technologies which are used in enterprise like AD Active Directory with Kerberos and then Unix LDAP and then we have Samba and then we have NIS and then we have local authentication like Passwd groups and the default configurations, right? So all those are used in enterprise. But for this video, I would be doing a demo on the Unix LDAP, how to configure it and how to configure the access with the LDAP on a Unix server, right? And I'll not be doing the local authentication too because that is kind of a very rare in enterprise that you would be configuring local accounts on the servers. So I'll not be going into that, and that is kind of a very basic, which is like user add command, user modify command, and group add, group modify command, which is kind of very common in all the Unix flavors. So I will not be going through that too. I'll be concentrating more on the LDAP commands to manage the user access, right? So to do the demo, I have already started my two machines here, Ubuntu 02 and Ubuntu 03. So I'll be using Ubuntu 03 as my LDAP server, where I have already installed the LDAP server and configured LDAP server on that Ubuntu 03. So I'll be not going into the server side of it because generally the identity management and the LDAP and the group creations and all these is considered part of a separate team, which is in enterprise like identity management team, and they govern all these groups and etc. So that is not generally considered as a Unix admin job to manage the LDAP server. So I'll be skipping that part here. Rather, I will be showing the client side configurations on the Unix servers, what we have to do. So let's start to see that now. Okay. So this is my client server, and to let it know that my Ubuntu 03 and the way I have configured it, I need to tell it that this is my LDAP server. So what is my LDAP server? Let's see. So if we see cat host right now, it has these entries, and I have a demo already created for this demo. So let's just copy that file into the host and see what is the difference. Okay. So if we do cat host again, so if you see here, I have put in the IP name and then I have put in the ldap.wfh.com. So that is what I have used in the LDAP configuration at my Ubuntu 03 server, right? So this information you will get from your identity management team, that what the LDAP server is, right? Let's move on. So now it knows that ldap.wfh.com is something which goes to this IP, and if I just ping with this name, it should be able to ping that, right? Okay, so that happens. So now moving to the LDAP. If you try to do LDAP search right now, does it work? No, it says LDAP utils is not installed. So let's install the LDAP utils. So LDAP search command and all other LDAP commands are part of LDAP utils, which needs to be installed on the client side, right? If you want to run the LDAP search commands or any of the LDAP commands to get the users and the groups and any information from the LDAP server, right? So let's install the LDAP utils. So LDAP utils is installed. Now if we run the LDAP search command again, it says cannot connect to the LDAP server. It is not complaining about the LDAP search command not found, right? So now it is trying to reach the LDAP. So it is not able to because we have not configured anything on the client server yet. So let's move on to another package which we need. So to let the server or let the client server know that it has to work with LDAP, we need to have a module for LDAP, and let's install that module. So if we do dpkg-s just to look for it, like pam underscore LDAP.so, this is the module. It says it is not found anywhere, right? So let's install the package which contains this module. So it is libpam hyphen ldap. Okay, so it will install the pam ldap module, and where we need to configure that will be we will be seeing just after this. Okay, so when you install it, it asks for the LDAP auth config. So here we would be giving the same name which we gave there. So it is asking for the LDAP server, right? So we can give LDAP, not I, because I is kind of IPC. Uh, so when you are running the LDAP server and the client on the same server, then you would use LDAP I. You can use LDAP S when you want to use the secured LDAP, but here we are not using the secure LDAP, so we will be just doing LDAP. Okay, and then we will be giving the name which we gave there in the host file, this one. So here, and then here we have the DC which we need to configure. So the DC is for my LDAP, WFH and com. So you would have seen the name, right? ldap.wfh.com. So this is the DC for my LDAP configuration. Hit OK, and I'm using LDAP version 3, and then it is saying that do you want to make a root database admin here. I don't want to because it is just a client, so I'll say no. And it is asking does LDAP database require login. I'm again saying no. So that's all. So for the client side, this is the simple configuration which you need to do, like giving the LDAP server name and giving the DC names, right? Okay, so if you see now, it is installed on the server. So we have the module for LDAP configured now on the server, right? So let's move on to etc pam.d, which has all the pam configuration files. Okay, and if we see all the files here, so it has these files: common account, common auth, common password, and common session. So these are the files which we need to configure. So let's look onto these configurations. Also, on the Linux flavor, it is also in etcpam.d, but the name of the configuration files is a little bit different, like system auth, password auth, and it has -ac, and which is kind of a file which you modify, and then there is a link for it which is without ac. So those are the configuration files in the Linux flavor, but in Ubuntu we have these 4 files. So let's take a look at common account here. So what does it have? So it has account pamunix.so, and if you see, pam ldap.so is already added. So when we install that module, it adds this pam ldap.so by default on all these files, right? If you see the time, it is just modified, right? So all these files are just modified with ldap.so. If you look at the other files, like common password, that will also have a entry for pam ldap. Okay, right here. Okay, so we don't need to modify it manually. If it is not working and if you get to, this is where you would look for the pam configuration, that if ldap is configured or if Kerberos is configured or what is it. So if it was a Kerberos, you would see a pam underscore krb.so. Okay, so another file which we would need to modify to make LDAP work is etc ldap.conf. So let's see the content of that file as of now. Okay, so if you see here, this is the default file, right? So I have the demo file already created. So I'll just copy that one here. Okay, and now if we see the ldap.conf, what I have modified is this. So I have modified the base and the URI. So in the URI, I have given my LDAP server name, and I'm not using LDAP I or LDAP S, rather I'm using plain LDAP Okay, so this is another file which you would need to modify for LDAP to work. So now if you run the LDAP search command, you would see that it is fetching the details from LDAP, the LDAP server which I have created with wfh.com, and I have the groups created as testers, and then I have users created like user 2, user 3, user 4, and I have a net group created which is testers net group, and I have added these 3 users on that testers net group, right? So LDAP search is fetching all that details from the LDAP. But if I try to look for that user, any of that user, it is still not recognizing that user, right? So it is able to fetch the details from LDAP through LDAP search command, but not able to recognize. So etc LDAP LDAP.conf is used by the LDAP utility commands, right, to fetch the details from LDAP. But there is another file which is cat etc ldap.conf. If we see, it has a lot of details. So this is what we would need to modify to make it work, that user is recognized by this client server. Okay, so I have again created a demo file already, which I'll just copy. Okay, so now if we see the content of this file, it has all these details. So it's almost the same what we have in ldap.conf. Like we have to define the base, and then we have to define the URI for the LDAP server, and then the version, and this bind in. So you can bind anonymously, you can bind with a password. So if there is a bind in configured for your LDAP server in your enterprise environment, you have to define that bind in here too. Okay, so this is what etc ldap.conf would look like. Now if we try to look for that user again which exists on LDAP, it is able to recognize it. So if you try user 3, user 4, all these users are on LDAP, and now it is able to recognize them, correct? Okay, so these are all the files which you would need to modify to make a client server work with the LDAP server or with the PAM LDAP authentication, right? Now let's come to the actual user configuration part. So for access, the file which gets modified generally is etc passwd, but not on the enterprise. Generally on the enterprise in Linux, we use access.conf to manage or restrict the access for the users, right? So here, if you see, it is everything commented out, but I'll be adding a few lines on this, and I have created a demo already for this. So I'll just copy that, and I'll explain what I have added there, right? Okay, so let's see the content of this now. So if you see here, this is what I added here, right? Last 5 lines. So this testers net group, like we saw, it is a net group which I created on LDAP, and I have added @ sign before it. So when on Unix you want to add a net group, you have to add that @sign before it. Okay, and then below that, this is testers, which is a group which is again on LDAP, but you don't need to put the @sign in front of it. Okay, this is a user, plain user, but again it is on LDAP, so you don't have to give or any symbol in front of it to let it know that it is LDAP user. You can simply give the username there. Okay, and this is root, which is a local account, but for this also you don't give any specific symbol, right? Now after the colon, if you see here, I have given all, so that means all the members of this net group can run anything, they can log in and they can do anything on this server, right? Same way, all the members of testers group can do anything on this server, but here I have given user 2 and I have given cron. So in access.conf you can actually define that what kind of access you want to provide. So if you want to restrict a user to just cron, you can give something like this, user to cron, right? And the next line, if you see here, it says IP, right? Which means that root can log in only from this IP. So root user won't be able to log in if it is not from this server. Otherwise, it will fail. Okay. And the last line minus all, if you see right here, the last line, it says all other users should be denied access. So that is kind of a standard that you would add on the server at the last, telling that anyone else who is not configured in access.conf should not get access to the servers, right? So that is how you would configure it. So let's open a duplicate session and try to log in with user 2, and let's see if we are able to log in. There you go, you are able to log in with the user 2 account, which is on LDAP, because we have given the net groups on the access.conf. So this is how you would configure the net groups or a LDAP user on access.conf to enable the login for that users or member of that groups, right? So let's log off here and get back here. So now when we know our login authentication from LDAP is working, there are a few other commands which I'd like to show in access configurations and the management, and one of that is W. So what it shows all the users who are logged in at the moment on the server, right? So that is all that details it gives from W. And if you see here, it gives you the uptime and the load on the server too, and how much CPU and resources is being consumed by a particular user and from where he is logged in, right? So all that information you can get from the W command. Another command which I would like to show here is who am I. So what who am I is showing you what user you are right now. So there is a difference between who am I all together and who space am space I. So if you do who space am space I, it is showing you user 1, while you do it together it says root. So when you switch to other user, all together who am I gives you the current user you are on, and space gives you the actual user from which you are logged in. So we logged in as user 1 and then we switched to root, right? So that's what it shows, right? So that is also a good command to know what actual user you are logged into. And another command which I'd like to show here is getInt, and the common command which is used with getInt is passwd. So if you want to get a detail for user who is an LDAP, you can do just getInt passwd and the username. So you will get the UID, GID, and his home directory and the shell, all that details, right? So that is pretty common command. And with the LDAP search also, like we have been doing LDAP search -x, you can actually define a specific objects which you want to search for. So if you like you want to search for user 3 specifically, so you can just give UID user 3, so it will give all the details for that user 3 from the LDAP, right? Similarly, if you want to see by UID number, you can simply give UID number, and then you can give the UID number, right? So like this. So again, you are getting the same details for user 3. Same way, if you want to uh, see the members of a group, you can simply use cn equal to and then give the group's name, something like this. So if you see here, it says LDAP search -x cn equal to testers. It is giving you the GID number of that group. Okay, and if you similarly want to see uh, what are the members of net group, you can simply give net group name 2 with the cn, and you will get the NIS net group triple, which is kind of members for that particular net group. So this is how you can look for the net group details or the group details or the user details from the LDAP. So a few other commands, right? Another command which I would like to show you is last. So I'm grabbing it with more so that it gives just a page. Gives all the users who logged into the server and from where they logged in and what time they logged in and all that details, and it even captures the reboot details, right, when it was rebooted the server, right? So all that details you can get from the last command. Now, so last command gets all its data from a file which is at log location as var log wtmp. Okay, so if you see this file, it has all the data, but in enterprise this file may get rotated or may get zipped to keep the old data, but at the same time keep the size at check. So let's do gzip this file, okay, and just make it empty. So if you run last command now, it shows nothing because it does not have anything in the wtmp, right? But if you want to fetch that data from your old file, let's see the wtmp zip file which we created. Okay, so this is the file, right? So you can simply copy it to some other location, or if it is having a different name, you can do it there itself. So go to that path and just unzip it. Here, and if you see here on tmp, you will get that wtmp file. Okay, so here it is. Now if you want to see the data for that old logs, you can simply do last hyphen f and then do wtmp. So you're getting the data from a zipped file which was rotated by the log rotation, right? So that is another example which is commonly needed when you are investigating user auditing or user access on the servers. Now another command like last is last log. So if you run last log, you would see that it is showing all the users which are configured on the server and when they were logged in. So if you see here, it says user 1 was logged in at this time and user 2 was logged in at this time, right? So you can see this, and all these users which are kind of local configured users have never logged in, right? So this is also a good command. And if you want to filter it for a specific user, you can simply give -u and the username like this, so you will get the details for that specific user. Because we are talking about the logs, there is another file which I'd like to just brief up, is varlog auth.log. So this file is similar to varlog secure in Linux or Red Hat environment. So it captures all the log data, or the all the log for users or the sudo commands which is executed on the server. So let's take a peek at this log file. So if we do this, and if we go to the end, let's forget about this connection timeout and the subscription. What we are interested in is here the SSHD commands. If you see here, it accepted password for the user too, and if you see here, like when we switched, it says sudo and switch to root, right? Successful su for root. Okay, so this is kind of logs which you would see on the var log auth.log. Okay, so just wanted to give that information. So that almost covers everything on the access part, that means the login access part. And before I move to the sudo part of the access management, I would like to show another file which is for SSH, and it is cat etc ssh and sshd underscore config. So this file has a lot of parameters, but the parameters which I'd like to go with is issue.net. So if you want to give a banner like a message when a user logs into your server, you can define it in issue.net and create a file, and that will be created as banner. So like on this server, when we log in, it gives a banner message, right? This package is available. So similarly, if you want to define your own banner, you can do that. Okay, and then if you go a little up, you would see here that we can, yeah, we can define root login. If we want to enable root login to the server, we can define it yes. And if you want to do the prohibit password, that means you want users to log in with root, but only with the key, not with the password. So suppose if someone tries to hack the password, that won't be happening because it can only log in with the key, right? So this is very common parameter which is used from this file. Okay, permit empty passwords, no, so we do not want users to have an empty password. So all these parameters are there in sshd config which you have to define and which you can use. Okay, there is another file as etc ssh and ssh config. So what is the difference? I mean, it is pretty common to get confused. So one is SSH client configuration files, and the other one is for the server configuration. So SSHD config is the server configuration. That means when someone else tries to log into the server, how SSH should react, that is in SSHD. And when from this server you try to use SSH client, like something like this, if you want to hop on from this server to another server like Ubuntu 03, this is what is configured in ssh underscore config, right? So I'm not going to switch to user. So just wanted to give the difference between ssh underscore config and sshd underscore config. Okay. And every time you change anything in sshd config or ssh config, you have to restart the sshd service. So just do service restart or system cdl restart sshd. Okay, so that is something we have to do. Now let's move on quickly to the sudoers part. So sudoers is elevated privileges. That means if you want to grant a group or a particular user some specific privileges to run on the server. So we have a default file as sudoers, which is a common file, right? Which has all these entries. But of late they started to use a drop directory file. Like we, what is drop directory? Like anything which is ending with .d, we call it drop directory. So it was very common for init.d, the init files, but now Unix is slowly moving all the configuration files where we probably would be having multiple files or multiple configurations to the drop directory structure. So if you would see here, there is nothing much other than the root and the admin and sudoers permissions. For others, if you want to configure it, you have to go to the drop directory and there you can configure it. I mean, you can configure it here too, but it is preferred that you configure it there. So right now there is nothing, right? But I have created a demo file again. So let me just copy that demo file. Yeah, sudoers demo, and let me copy that to etc sudoers.d. Okay, so now if we see here, so for drop directory file, the most important thing is this, that rr and everything is blank. So that means it has to be 440 permissions, nothing else. If you give any other permissions for the files in the drop directory, you will be getting the sudoers error and sudoers will break. So make sure that whatever file you are copying there or whatever files you are creating it with vi sudo, not with any other command. So whenever you run with vi sudo, it will by default open your etc sudoers file. Okay, so this is the etc sudoers file, and when you run it with vi sudo, it parses for any errors in that file. So I'm not going to modify this one. I'll go to the file which I have created, right? So if we just do vi sudo -f and this file. Okay, so if you do this, what I have here is, I'm gonna explain now. I have user alias. So user alias is a group of users which you can use in sudoers, within sudoers. So you give something like this, user alias, and you give the alias name, and then you add users separated by comma. So all these users are merged or combined as wfh users user alias. Same way we have run as alias. So if you want to give users which can be used as run as, so you can create a alias for that too. So I have created a run as alias as wfh admin, and I have used root user as the alias user. Okay, similarly you can create a command alias where you can give the command alias name and all the commands which user can run as part of that alias. So here what I have given, I have given all the commands, but I have negated all these commands. So I want to use this alias to grant all the permissions to any user except vi sudo itself and reboot of server. So I don't want a user to reboot a server. I don't want a user to modify users to grant himself other permissions, right? So I have negated those permissions by exclamation mark. So that is how you can negate permissions giving all, right? And if you see this, this is a forward slash which has to be given if you want to give the commands or the users or any of the entries in the next line. So if it is going to multiple lines, you have to give something like this. And if you miss this slash, you are gonna get parse error. Okay. Similarly, we have the hosts alias created. So I have created host alias as Ubuntu 01 and 02. So this is commonly used when we are using a centralized management tool, right? So we create a alias, we create a common file which is pushed to all the servers. Like if we would talk about this file can be pushed to Ubuntu 01 and Ubuntu 02, where we would be giving the similar privileges to all the users on that server, right? So that is how you would achieve it, and that is what you want to achieve with the WFH host or the host alias. And rather than giving the names, you can do that by the subnet too. So if you have something that you just want to give all the servers in your subnet on your network, you can do something like this. So so if you see, this is a subnet of my host only network. So I have given this and I have given the subnet mask. So any server which is having a IP in this subnet can be granted all these permissions if I use host alias WFH network. Okay. Now coming here. So if you see this line, it has all the aliases. So WFH users is a user alias, WFH host is a host alias, okay? And if you see here WFH admin, it has this root user, and if you see WFH commands, it has all these commands. So what it says, let's try to see by logging into the user 2. So let me open the duplicate session. Okay, we are now logged in with user 2, and if you do sudo -l, which is a command to list all the given sudo permissions for a user, you have to give the password. So if I give this, what I'm getting in the first line is root all and this command. So that is what we have defined here, right? So WFH users, user 2 is part of WFH user, and then if you see vi sudo is negated in the WFH commands command alias, that is what we have given in this command, and we have given the alias WFH admin as root here, right? So that is what we have defined in this line, correct? Okay, so what is the next line? Next line is for a specific user. So we are not using any alias, we are not using any net group or group. So if you want to give that way, you have to give simple username, and then I'm using again a network host alias. So I'm giving this, and I can give a specific user here, and I have given all the commands to run as user 1. Okay, so if I go back to my user 2, if you see the second line, it says I can run any command with user 1, right? So this is kind of where the cron comes into the picture. So what user 2 can do, user 2 can run sudo su hyphen to user 1. Okay, so he can switch to user 1 because user 1 is not allowed to log in. I mean, not in this case, but in a actual case, what will happen that user 1 or a service account or a database account is not allowed to log in directly to the server, but a user who is logged in with his ID like user 2, he can switch to that service account like this su hyphen, and then he can run cron tab command to do whatever he wants. Okay, so that way this user one, which symbolizes the service account, cannot log in directly to the server, but a user 2 who has sudo permission to user 1 can switch to that user and schedule a cron job with that account. Okay, so that is how we use that access.conf configuration. Okay, coming to the sudo again, the next line, if you see here, is plus sign and the testers net group. So this is how you would define a net group in sudoers. So like in the access.conf, we would give at the rate. Here we would give plus sign, and then again if you see this, it is something which I have given all the permissions with all the users, so it is as good as root. Okay, so I have given all the users of this net group to run anything with any users on this server. So if you see here back to the user 2, this is what it says. Okay, all. So anyone, any user who is part of testers net group can run anything on this server. So that is what that line means. Okay, coming to the last line. So if you see here, this is a testers group, and on Ubuntu 01 server, I have given user 1, user 1 and user 3, and then I have given this permission. So let me change actually this to Ubuntu 02. Oops. Okay, so if I want to save this, I just hit yes and done. Okay, so now I have changed that, and if I run the sudo -l command again, okay, I have to switch back. I close the session, let me open again. Okay, so now if you see the permissions for user 2 on the server, this line is added, right? So what I did, I have created a line, or I have changed the host name here, and I have given the permissions for user 2 to run anything as, not anything, sorry, run bin bash and su hyphen as user 1 or user 3, right? So that is what the last line means, and I have uses a group there, testers group. So with group you would use the percentage sign. So that is kind of a all formats you would be using in a sudoers file. Okay, and that is how you would configure sudo permissions, elevated privileges to any users or the groups in Unix, right? So let's come back to this server and let me show you what I meant by the parser. So if I just miss this, suppose, and if I try to save it, it will give me error. See, it says syntax error at line 5, and this is why I say that always use vi sudo, which parses the file at the end. When you try to write it, it will tell you there is an error, and you can simply do edit and you can go back and try to fix it. And if by any chance you modify it directly with vi without vi sudo, you are going to mess up your sudoers configurations. Okay, with sudo there is another command which you would be using very often if you are admin, is sudo -u and user 2 -l. So what does it show? It shows you the permissions of any other user if you are a admin, right? So it shows me the permissions what user to have on this server. Okay, and another command which I would like to show you is sudo -k. So what does this one does? So right now if I run sudo -l, it shows me the permissions, and I can run any command with sudo until my sudo times out. So if I leave this session for a while and my sudo times out, then only it will ask me for the password, right? But for any reason, if you want to time out your sudo immediately, you can use this command sudo -k. Okay, so next time you run any sudo command, it will again ask you the password, right? So that is how you can do it. And another common command, like if you are not having a sudo -i permissions or sudo's su hyphen permission, then you have to open a bash shell like I was showing. So you can do that by doing this. So what it does, it opens a interactive shell. That is what -i means with user 1, because user 2 has the sudo permissions to run any commands as user 1. Okay, you can do this or you can do bin bash. So it will also open a shell for that user, right? So these are all the sudo commands which I wanted to show you, and with this I am done with all the access configurations and the management which I wanted to show in this video. So that is all for today, and thank you for watching.